Inspector Purbright did not, as a rule, attend garden parties. He held no objection to them in principle. Indeed, he approved of the general notion of cucumber sandwiches and restrained conversation conducted beneath well-behaved trees. What he disliked, quietly and without flourish, was the expectation that one must pretend not to notice things. On this particular afternoon, however, he found himself seated beneath a white canvas awning in the garden of Mrs. Hester Dalrymple, who had insisted, through a series of increasingly polite but firm invitations, that his presence would lend a reassuring sense of order to proceedings. Purbright suspected that what she meant was something closer to supervision. The garden itself was admirably arranged. Chairs had been distributed with an eye for both symmetry and discretion, ensuring that no guest could feel either excluded or overexposed. A long table bore the usual offerings, attended by a young woman whose expression suggested she had been hired for competence rather than enthusiasm. The guests, numbering perhaps 20, were engaged in that delicate social choreography peculiar to villages. Conversations began, dissolved, and reassembled elsewhere, like clouds reconsidering their positions. Purbright observed Mrs. Dalrymple herself moved through the gathering with brisk assurance, pausing just long enough at each cluster to demonstrate attentiveness before advancing to the next. She wore a hat that could not easily be ignored, though several guests made valiant attempts. Near the lilac hedge stood Mr. Edwin Carow, a retired solicitor whose manner suggested he had never entirely ceased practicing, and even in retirement. He spoke to Miss Lydia Vane, who nodded with such careful regularity that one suspected she had ceased listening some time ago. Closer to the house, Mrs. Peterlin, whose husband had once been something in insurance, though no one seemed quite certain what, was recounting a minor grievance involving the parish newsletter. Her audience appeared sympathetic in the abstract. Purbright accepted a cup of tea from the young woman at the table and took a seat slightly apart from the others. From this vantage he could hear just enough. It was not the content of the conversations that interested him, at least not initially. It was their arrangement, the small hesitations, the unnecessary emphasis, the curious timing of laughter. One learned, in his profession, and that what people chose to say was often less revealing than when they chose to say it. A light breeze stirred the edges of the awning. Somewhere beyond the hedge, a dog barked with intermittent conviction. It was, in every outward respect, an unremarkable afternoon. The disturbance, when it came, was so mild that several guests later insisted it had not occurred at all. Miss Lydia Vane, who had been nodding, stopped. It was a small thing. Her head simply ceased its motion and remained inclined at an angle that suggested attention of a different order. Mr. Carow, mid-sentence, faltered. And in matters of conveyance, one must always, well, he cleared his throat. Always proceed with caution. Miss Vane did not respond. Across the lawn, Mrs. Dalrymple turned, as though prompted by a sound no one else had quite registered. Purbright, who had been listening to the murmur of voices as one listens to rain, noticed the absence. Silence, when it arrives uninvited, has a shape. It spread outward in subtle increments. Conversations thinned, then paused. Cups were set down with unnecessary care. "Lydia!" Mrs. Dalrymple called, her tone bright but edged with inquiry. Miss Vane straightened. "Yes, I'm sorry, I thought—" She stopped. "What did you think?" asked Mr. Carow, with the faint impatience of a man interrupted. Miss Vane hesitated. "I thought someone was in the house." There was a moment in which this suggestion was considered. The house stood behind them, its windows reflecting the garden in a manner that discouraged inspection. The French doors were open, as they had been all afternoon. "Nonsense," said Mrs. Peterlin from her position near the table. "Ah, we would have seen them." "Not necessarily," said Mr. Carrow. "One might enter from the side." Mrs. Dalrymple had begun to move toward the house, her expression arranged into something approaching amusement. "I assure you," she said, "there is no one in the house who has not been expressly invited." Purbright rose. It was not urgency that prompted him, nor even concern. It was, rather, the recognition of a pattern beginning to form. "I wonder," he said mildly, "if we might take a look all the same." Mrs. Dalrymple paused, then inclined her head. "Of course, Inspector, though I expect you will find nothing at all." "Nothing at all," echoed Mr. Carrow, as though the phrase required reinforcement. They crossed the lawn together, Purbright a step behind Mrs. Dalrymple. Ahoniku's pace had quickened, by a degree she perhaps did not intend to reveal. Inside, the house was cool and faintly scented with polish. The hallway extended in both directions, its surfaces arranged with a precision that bordered on insistence. "There, you see," said Mrs. Dalrymple, gesturing lightly. "Perfectly in order." Purbright did not reply. He listened. The house, unlike the garden, offered no immediate sound. Yet there was, he thought, a residue, a suggestion that something had recently disturbed the stillness. He moved toward the sitting-room on the left. The door stood ajar. "May I?" he asked. "By all means." The room was as one would expect, chairs aligned, a small table bearing a vase of flowers that had not yet decided to wilt, a writing desk near the window. Purbright approached the desk. "What is it?" Mrs. Dalrymple asked. Nothing," he said. Then, after a moment, "Only this drawer appears not to be fully closed," she frowned. "That is most unlike me." Indeed. He did not open the drawer. Instead, he looked at Mrs. Dalrymple, whose composure had acquired a slight rigidity. "Shall we check the rest of the house?" he suggested. They proceeded methodically, though not perhaps with the same definition of method. In the dining-room, nothing appeared disturbed. In the kitchen, the young woman from the garden table was arranging plates with an expression of mild bewilderment. "Has anyone come in?" Mrs. Dalrymple asked. "No, ma'am." "Are you quite sure?" "Yes, ma'am." Purbright observed the arrangement of the plates, the position of the door, the angle at which the light entered. He said nothing. Upstairs, the bedrooms presented a similar picture of order. "I'm yet in one room, a smaller one, evidently used for guests." He paused. "What is it now?" Mrs. Dalrymple asked, her patience thinning. "The window," he said. "It is open." "Yes. I often open it in the afternoon." "Of course." He stepped closer. The curtain moved slightly in the breeze. "And yet," he added, "the latch appears to have been recently handled." Mrs. Dalrymple gave a short laugh. "Inspector, you are determined to find something, even where nothing exists." "On the contrary," he said, "I find that nothing is often quite sufficient." They returned to the garden. The guests had resumed their positions, though not perhaps their ease. Conversations restarted with a deliberateness that suggested rehearsal. "Well?" called Mr. Carrow. "Nothing at all," said Mrs. Dalrymple, a shade too quickly. Purbright took his seat once more, as Miss Vane was watching him. "You heard it too, didn't you?" she said in a low voice. "I heard many things," he replied. "But you think—" "I think," he said, "that it is a pity when a perfectly agreeable afternoon is interrupted." She frowned. "That isn't what I meant." "No," he said gently. "I don't suppose it is." Across the lawn, Mrs. Dalrymple was speaking to Mr. Carrow in tones that aimed for discretion but did not quite achieve it. "I cannot imagine—" "Quite," said Mr. Carrow. Purbright lifted his cup, which had gone cold. He had, over the course of his career, learned to distinguish between sounds that belonged and sounds that did not. What interested him now was not the possibility that someone had been in the house. It was the curious unanimity with which everyone seemed to prefer that possibility dismissed. He set the cup down. In the afternoon resumed, but something, he thought, had already been said, whether or not anyone intended it. And, once said, such things had a way of remaining. The party did not end abruptly, which might have been simpler. Instead, it diminished. Guests began to recall prior engagements with a politeness that bordered on apology. Cups were set aside, gloves retrieved, and small, careful farewells exchanged with an air of having nearly forgotten something of importance. Mrs. Dalrymple received each departure with composed warmth. If she felt any urgency to conclude the afternoon, she concealed it behind an efficiency that allowed no guest to linger longer than was strictly courteous. Purbright observed the sequence. Miss Vane left early, though she paused at the gate as if expecting to be called back. When no such summons came, she departed with a backward glance that lingered on the upper windows of the house. Mr. Carrow remained longer than most. He stationed himself near Mrs. Dalrymple with the quiet persistence of a man who believed his presence to be useful, though not necessarily welcome. "You see," he was saying, "these small disturbances, if allowed to go unexamined, can lead to a most unfortunate habit of speculation." "I quite agree," said Mrs. Dalrymple, with a brightness that suggested agreement was preferable to contradiction. "There is no reason," he continued, "to suppose anything beyond a simple misunderstanding." "None at all." Purbright, standing at a slight remove, noted that neither of them specified what precisely was being misunderstood. The young woman who had served the tea began to clear the table with methodical care. Of her movements were efficient, though her attention appeared divided. Twice she turned her head toward the house, then quickly away, as though correcting an impulse. When at last the final guest had gone, and the gate closed with a soft, definitive click, a stillness settled over the garden that differed markedly from the earlier quiet. It was no longer the absence of sound, but the absence of performance. Mrs. Dalrymple exhaled. "Well," she said, "that was most peculiar." Mr. Carrow nodded gravely. "Entirely unnecessary." Purbright stepped forward. "May I impose upon your time for a few minutes longer?" Mrs. Dalrymple regarded him with an expression that balanced reluctance and obligation. "Of course, Inspector, though I cannot imagine what more there is to say." "Very little, I expect," he replied. "All, but it is often useful to say it." They moved inside once more, Mr. Carrow accompanying them without invitation, but with an air of inevitability. In the sitting-room the light had shifted. The arrangement remained as before, though it now seemed to possess a different character, less a display, more a record. Mrs. Dalrymple took a seat near the writing desk. Mr. Carrow remained standing, one hand resting lightly on the back of a chair. Purbright did not sit. "You mentioned," he began, addressing Mrs. Dalrymple, "that no one was in the house who had not been invited." "That is correct." "And you are certain of this?" "I have no reason to doubt it." "No reason at all?" She hesitated, very slightly. "None that would justify the sort of alarm Miss Vane appeared to feel." Purbright inclined his head. "And yet, the drawer in this desk was not fully closed." Mrs. Dalrymple's gaze flickered toward it. "A minor oversight." "Possibly." Mr. Carrow cleared his throat. "Surely, Inspector, we are not to infer significance from the position of a drawer." "Not in isolation," said Purbright. "Then what precisely are we inferring?" Purbright did not answer at once. Instead, he turned to the young woman, who had entered quietly and now stood near the doorway, a tray in her hands. "You have been here all afternoon?" he asked. "Yes, sir." "And you did not see anyone enter the house?" "No, sir." "Nor hear anything unusual?" She paused. "No, sir." The hesitation was brief, but not invisible. "Thank you," he said. She inclined her head and withdrew. Mr. Carrow watched her go. "A most reliable girl," he remarked. "Mrs. Dalrymple is fortunate." "Indeed," said Purbright. Mrs. Dalrymple rose. "Inspector, I must insist. If there is something you wish to suggest, it would be better to do so plainly." Purbright regarded her for a moment. "I do not suggest," he said. "I listen." "And what do you hear?" "Not what is said," he replied. "That, I find, is often arranged." Mr. Carrow gave a small, impatient gesture. "This is becoming unnecessarily obscure." "On the contrary," said Purbright, "it is becoming clearer." He moved toward the window where the curtain hung motionless. "This afternoon," he continued, "a number of small things occurred. Individually, they are of no consequence. Collectively, they form a pattern." "A pattern of what?" asked Mrs. Dalrymple. "Of attention," he said. "Directed, withheld, and redirected." Mr. Carrow frowned. I fail to see." "Yes," said Purbright gently. "I believe you do." There was a brief silence. Mrs. Dalrymple returned to her seat. "Inspector," she said more quietly, "if you are implying that someone entered this house during the party, I must ask on what grounds?" "On no grounds that would satisfy a court," he replied, "but perhaps sufficient to justify a conversation." "With whom?" He considered this. "With the person," he said, "who has been most careful not to have one." Mr. Carrow stiffened slightly. "This is absurd." "Is it?" Purbright asked. He turned back to the desk and, with a deliberate motion, opened the drawer. Inside there was very little: a few sheets of paper, neatly arranged, a pen, an envelope, unsealed. Purbright lifted the envelope and glanced at its contents. "Private correspondence," said Mrs. Dalrymple sharply. "No, of course." He replaced it exactly as he had found it and closed the drawer. "No intrusion," he said, "only confirmation." "Of what?" "That whatever occurred here today," he replied, "was not entirely unexpected." Mr. Carrow gave a short laugh. "You are constructing a narrative, Inspector. One might just as easily construct another." "Indeed," said Purbright, "and that is precisely what has been done." Mrs. Dalrymple looked at him steadily. "By whom?" Purbright moved toward the door. "I think," he said, "that will become apparent." He paused, then added, almost as an afterthought, "In the meantime, it would be advisable not to rearrange anything further." "Further?" Mr. Carrow repeated. Purbright inclined his head. "Good afternoon." He left them in the sitting-room, where the light continued its slow adjustment, and the objects, although undisturbed, seemed to wait for something not yet acknowledged. Outside, the garden had returned to its earlier composure, but the arrangement, he thought, had altered in a way that could not easily be restored. Continue the narration while maintaining a strong, logical flow that connects seamlessly with the previous part. The transition should feel natural and engaging, ensuring the script unfolds smoothly. Every event must build upon the last, leading toward the next development without abrupt shifts. Follow these guidelines, keep the narrative tightly connected to the previous section. Ensure the timeline remains strong and coherent, no unnecessary jumps or diversions. The tone, pacing, and style must match the established flow. Maintain suspense and intrigue while guiding the story toward the next key moment. Avoid headlines or section breaks. The story should feel continuous and immersive, Always respond directly in chat without breaking the story format. Outlining for this part, the matter of Mrs. Dalrymple's tea, 1020 words. Begin writing now. Focus follow. The word count instruction given in the chapter, outline no more word, no less. Just focus on instruction, you are professional. Don't give me more or less, just stay in instruction word count, and also give me chapter heading only, no headings in script, stay in the word count limit, don't crows, limits. The matter of Mrs. Dalrymple's tea. Purbright did not go far. He had reached the gate when he paused, resting his hand lightly upon its latch, as though the act of leaving required a degree of consideration not yet satisfied. The lane beyond lay quiet, and its hedgerows maintaining their habitual discretion. Nothing in that direction suggested urgency. Behind him the house remained composed. He turned back. It was not, he reflected, a matter of suspicion in the usual sense. Nothing had been taken, so far as anyone had said. Nothing had been openly disturbed. Yet the afternoon had acquired a quality that resisted conclusion, as though some small but essential element had been omitted from the account. He re-entered the garden without announcement. The young woman was still there, gathering the last of the cups. She looked up, startled, then quickly recovered. "I thought you had gone, sir." "So did I," he said mildly. "But I find I have a question I neglected to ask." "Yes, sir." He approached the table. "The tea," he said. "You prepared it?" "Yes, sir." "At what time?" She hesitated. Just before the guests arrived, about 3 o'clock. "And it has remained here since then?" "Yes, sir. I refreshed it once when Mrs. Dalrymple asked." "Refreshed it?" he repeated. "In what way?" "I brought more hot water, sir." "I see." He looked at the teapot, which sat among the cups with an air of having fulfilled its purpose. "May I?" She nodded. He lifted the lid and peered inside, though without apparent interest in the contents themselves. Instead, he seemed to consider the arrangement, the angle of the handle, the placement of the strainer, the faint mark upon the rim. "You are accustomed to serving tea in this manner?" he asked. "Yes, sir." "And nothing struck you as unusual this afternoon?" She shook her head. "No, sir." Again the hesitation. Purbright replaced the lid. "Thank you," he said. He turned toward the house. So inside, Mrs. Dalrymple and Mr. Carrow remained in the sitting room, their conversation having resumed in tones that suggested careful moderation. "No reason to suppose," Mr. Carrow was saying, "that any of this extends beyond a simple lapse." "A lapse of what?" Mrs. Dalrymple asked. "Attention, perhaps." Purbright entered. They both looked up. "I must apologize," he said, "for prolonging matters. There is one further point I should like to clarify." Mrs. Dalrymple regarded him with a composure that had grown more deliberate. "If you must." "It concerns the tea." Mr. Carrow blinked. "The tea?" "Yes." "I fail to see—" "Quite," said Purbright. He moved toward the small table where a single cup had been left behind, its contents untouched. "This cup," he said, "was poured, but not consumed." Mrs. Dalrymple glanced at it. "One of the guests?" "Ah, no doubt." "Which guest?" "I cannot be expected to recall every—" "No," he said gently. "But perhaps you recall this one." She hesitated. "It may have been Miss Vane." "May have been." She seemed distracted. "Yes." Purbright considered the cup. "And yet," he said, "it was placed here, apart from the others." Mr. Carrow gave a small shrug. "People set things down." "Indeed." Purbright lifted the cup and examined it briefly, then set it back in precisely the same position. "The tea itself," he continued, "was prepared at 3 o'clock and refreshed once thereafter." "So we have been told," said Mr. Carrow. "And no one entered the house during that time?" Precisely. Purbright nodded. Then it is curious, he said, that the second infusion appears stronger than the first. Mrs. Dalrymple frowned. I beg your pardon. The colour, he said. It suggests a longer steeping. Mr. Carrow made an impatient gesture. Surely this is of no consequence. On the contrary, said Purbright, it is of the smallest consequence, which is precisely why it interests me. He moved back toward the desk. When small things fail to align, he continued, it is often because they have been arranged to do so. Mrs. Dalrymple rose. Inspector, I must insist, this line of inquiry is becoming absurd. Is it? He asked. She met his gaze. You are suggesting what exactly? That the tea has been tampered with? I suggest nothing, he said. I observe. Mr. Carrow gave a short laugh. Then observe this. The afternoon has been conducted with perfect propriety. No one has suffered any ill effect. No property has been reported missing. There is, in short, no incident. Purbright inclined his head. And yet we are discussing it. Because Miss Vane chose to imagine. Miss Vane, said Purbright, did not imagine the silence. There was a brief pause. Mrs. Dalrymple turned away. This is becoming tiresome. Yes, he said, it often does. He moved toward the door once more, then paused. One final question, he said. Neither of them spoke. When the tea was refreshed, he continued, who requested it? Mrs. Dalrymple answered at once. I did. At what moment? She hesitated. Shortly before the interruption. The interruption, he repeated. Yes. Purbright nodded slowly. And you left the garden to give that instruction? No, she said. I spoke to the girl from where I was sitting. He considered this. Oh, and she went inside. Yes. For how long? I did not time her. Of course not. He looked from one to the other. Then it would appear, he said, that the only person to enter the house during the relevant interval was the one person who assures us that no one entered the house. Mr. Carrow stiffened. This is quite unwarranted. Is it? The girl has been perfectly clear. Yes, said Purbright. Perfectly. Mrs. Dalrymple sank back into her chair. Inspector, what are you implying? Purbright regarded her for a moment. I am implying, he said, that the afternoon has been described to me in a manner that is both accurate and incomplete. Mr. Carrow frowned. That is a contradiction. No, said Purbright, is a selection. He moved to the window. Outside, the garden remained still, the chairs empty, the table cleared. She's the tea, he said, was prepared, served, refreshed, and left. Each of these actions is accounted for, and yet between them something has been omitted. Mrs. Dalrymple's voice was quieter now. What do you expect to find, Inspector? He turned. Not what? He said. Who? There was a silence that did not disperse. Mr. Carrow looked away. Mrs. Dalrymple's hands rested in her lap, very still. Purbright inclined his head. I shall not trouble you further, he said. This time he did not pause at the gate. Behind him the house resumed its composure, though not perhaps its certainty. And in the small matter of the tea, something remained unresolved, not in its preparation, but in its telling. Purbright did not return to the station immediately. Instead, he took the lane at an unhurried pace, his steps neither directed nor idle, but arranged in that manner which allowed thought to settle without appearing to do so. The hedgerows offered little in the way of distraction, and the afternoon, having passed its social obligations, had grown quietly indifferent. He had not gone far when he heard footsteps behind him. Inspector. He turned. Miss Vane approached with a certain determination that did not entirely conceal her uncertainty. She had removed her hat, which she now held rather tightly, in her hands. "I hoped I might catch you," she said. "So you have," he replied. She drew a breath. "I wanted to explain." "Yes." They stood for a moment without speaking, the silence between them less awkward than it might have been. "I did hear something," she said at last. "In the house." "I believe you." "It wasn't—" She paused. "It wasn't exactly a sound. Not at first." Purbright waited. "It was more the sense of a sound," she continued, as though something had just stopped. He inclined his head slightly. "Go on." "I thought it might be someone moving about upstairs. A door, perhaps, or a step." She frowned. "But when I listened properly, there was nothing." "And that troubled you?" "Yes." "Why?" She hesitated. "Because it felt deliberate." Purbright regarded her. "In what way?" As though whoever had made the sound had realized they shouldn't have. He said nothing. "And then," she added, "I thought I heard voices." "Voices?" "Yes, very faint, not words exactly, more like tones." "From where?" "The passage, I think, or just beyond it." Purbright considered this. "And you did not mention this at the time?" "No." She looked down. "It seemed ridiculous." "Not necessarily." "I didn't want to appear foolish." "A common concern?" he said. She gave a small, uncertain smile. "Do you think there was someone there?" "I think," he replied, "that you noticed something others preferred not to notice." "That isn't the same?" "No," he said, "but it is often as useful." They resumed walking, though without apparent agreement to do so. "Mr. Carrow," she said after a moment, "didn't like it." "Didn't like what?" "That I spoke up." Purbright glanced at her. "In what way?" "He looked at me," she said, "as though I had said something improper, not incorrect, improper." An important distinction. "Yes." "And Mrs. Dalrymple?" "She was kind, but only just." Purbright nodded. They reached a point where the lane curved slightly, offering a view back toward the house, and now partially obscured by trees. "I suppose," Miss Vane said, "it will all come to nothing." "Possibly." "And yet you don't think so." He considered this. "I think," he said, "that something was interrupted." "At the party?" "No, before it." She looked at him quickly. "You mean whatever was happening in the house?" "Yes." "And we arrived in the middle of it? Or just after?" She was silent for a moment. "Then why pretend otherwise?" "Because," he said, "it is often easier to deny an interruption than to explain what was interrupted." They stood for a moment, the house now barely visible. "Will you go back?" she asked. "Not today." "And tomorrow?" "Perhaps." She nodded, though without satisfaction. "I don't like it," she said. "No," he agreed. "Nor do they." They parted at the next turning, Miss Vane continuing toward the village, Purbright taking the longer route that would eventually return him to the station. As he walked, he considered her account. Not the content, which was necessarily uncertain, but the manner in which it had been given. There had been no embellishment, no attempt to persuade. Only a reluctance overcome by a sense that silence might be worse. Such accounts were rarely precise, but they were often true in ways that more confident statements were not. By the time he reached the station, the light had begun to fade. Inside, the air held the familiar mixture of paper and quiet industry. Sergeant Bryce looked up from his desk with mild surprise. "Inspector, I didn't expect you back so soon." "Nor did I," said Purbright. "Anything of interest?" Purbright removed his hat and set it down. "A garden party," he said. Bryce waited, with a minor disturbance. "What sort of disturbance?" "The polite kind." Bryce frowned slightly. Should I make a note of it? Not yet. He moved to his desk and sat down, though without immediately attending to any particular task. Has there been anything here? He asked. Nothing out of the ordinary. Good. Bryce hesitated. Do you expect there to be? Purbright considered this. I expect, he said, that we shall hear something further. From whom? That remains to be seen. He reached for a sheet of paper, then paused. Tell me, he said, has Mrs. Dalrymple had occasion to contact us before? Bryce thought for a moment. Not directly. There was a matter some years ago, missing property, I believe, but it was resolved without difficulty. Missing what? I couldn't say. It was before my time. Purbright nodded. Find out, he said. Yes, sir. Bryce made a note. And Sergeant, Purbright added. Yes. If anyone calls regarding this afternoon, yes, sir. Listen carefully. Bryce looked at him. For what? Purbright leaned back slightly. For what is not said, he replied. Bryce considered this, then nodded, though without complete comprehension. Purbright turned his attention at last to the paper before him. He did not begin to write. Instead, he listened. The station, unlike the house, offered no suggestion of concealed voices, no hint of interruption. Its sounds were straightforward, its silences uncomplicated. And yet, as the evening settled, he found himself recalling the passage Miss Vane had described, not as a place, but as a moment, a point at which something had nearly been heard, then withdrawn. Voices, not speaking but present. He tapped the paper lightly with his finger. In such matters, it was rarely the words themselves that mattered. It was the fact that they had been spoken at all. The following morning did not present itself as one inclined toward revelations. It began rather with the ordinary sequence of small obligations, correspondence to be reviewed, reports to be initialed, and a brief exchange with Sergeant Bryce regarding matters that possessed the virtue of clarity. Purbright attended to these with his usual precision, though not perhaps with his usual absorption. His attention, such as it was, remained divided, not in a manner that suggested distraction, but in one that allowed for a secondary arrangement of thought. Shortly after 10 o'clock, Bryce approached his desk. I made the inquiry, sir. Yes. Regarding Mrs. Dalrymple. Purbright looked up. There was indeed a report some 5 years ago, a small matter, as I mentioned, a piece of jewellery, mislaid, then recovered. Recovered where? In the house, sir. Under what circumstances? Bryce consulted his notes. It appears the item, a brooch, was found in a drawer where it had not been placed by its owner. Purbright regarded him. Not placed, he repeated. So it was stated? And no further action was taken? No, sir. The matter was considered resolved. By whom? The attending officer at the time, a Constable Hale. Purbright nodded slowly. And Mrs. Dalrymple was satisfied with this? So it would seem. Very good. Bryce hesitated. Do you think it is connected? I think, said Purbright, that it is consistent. With what? With a preference, he replied, for explanations that do not disturb the arrangement. Bryce absorbed this, then nodded, though without complete certainty. Anything further? He asked. Not at present. Bryce returned to his desk. Purbright remained where he was for some time, considering the note before him. Then, with a small, deliberate movement, he folded it and placed it aside. At 10:30, the telephone rang. Bryce answered it, listened, then covered the receiver with his hand. It's for you, sir. Purbright rose and took the call. Inspector Purbright. There was a brief pause. Ah, said Mrs. Dalrymple's voice, composed but lacking its usual ease. I hope I'm not disturbing you. Not at all. I wondered if you might find it convenient to call this morning. I believe I might. There is... She hesitated. There is something I should like to clarify. Of course. If you would come at 11, I shall be there. He replaced the receiver. Bryce looked at him. Something further, then? It would appear so. Shall I accompany you? No. Purbright collected his hat. I think, he said, this may be a conversation best conducted without witnesses. The lane to Mrs. Dalrymple's house appeared unchanged from the previous day. The hedgerows retained their composure, the gate its quiet reluctance. He arrived precisely at 11. Mrs. Dalrymple received him in the sitting-room. She was alone. I am grateful you could come, she said. Not at all. She gestured to a chair. Please. He remained standing for a moment, then sat. I have been considering our conversation yesterday, she began. Oh, yes. And I feel that I may have been less forthcoming than was appropriate. Purbright inclined his head. In what respect? She clasped her hands. There was, in fact, an expectation that someone might come to the house. He said nothing. Not during the party, she added quickly. Before. I see. I didn't mention this at the time as it seemed irrelevant. Did it? She met his gaze. I hoped it would be. Purbright regarded her for a moment. And who was expected? He asked. She hesitated. A former acquaintance, she said at last. Someone with whom I had unfinished business. In what sense? In a personal sense. Purbright did not pursue this immediately. And this person did not arrive? I cannot say. You cannot say. No. Why not? Because, she said, with a trace of irritation. Yet I did not see them. And yet you expected them? Yes. And took no steps to confirm whether they had come? She looked away. I preferred not to. Purbright leaned back slightly. That is an unusual preference? Yes, she said. I am aware of that. There was a brief silence. Did anyone else know of this expectation? He asked. She hesitated. Mr. Carrow? Only him? Yes. And Miss Vane? No. Purbright considered this. Then it is curious, he said, that Miss Vane should be the one to notice the disturbance. Mrs. Dalrymple's expression tightened. She is imaginative. Perhaps, he rose. Inspector, she said quickly, you must understand there is nothing improper in this, nothing that requires intervention. Intervention, he repeated. Yes. I am not intervening, he said. I am listening. She gave a small, unstrained laugh. You have said that before. Yes. And what have you heard? Purbright moved toward the desk. That the afternoon was arranged, he said, not merely in its details, but in its expectations. He touched the drawer lightly, and that something occurred which did not conform to those expectations. Mrs. Dalrymple remained very still. You believe this person came, she said. I believe, he replied, that the possibility cannot be dismissed. And if they did? Then the question is not whether they came, he said, but what they did. She rose abruptly. This is absurd. Is it? There was no confrontation, no incident. Not of the sort that declares itself, he agreed. She turned away. I will not have my affairs examined in this manner, she said. Purbright regarded her quietly. And then it would be advisable, he said, to ensure that they do not examine themselves. She did not reply. After a moment he inclined his head. I shall not trouble you further today, he said. He moved toward the door. Inspector. He paused. If there were something to tell, she said without turning, I would tell it. Purbright considered this. Yes, he said. I believe you would. He left her standing by the desk. the drawer still closed, the room arranged as before. Outside, the garden showed no sign of the previous day's disturbance. Yet as he passed through the gate, he was aware that something had shifted, not in the house, nor in the garden, but in the account that had been given. An expectation had been admitted, and with it the certainty that the disturbance had not been accidental. It had been awaited. And whether or not it had been recognized, Purbright did not return directly to the station. Instead, he took a slower route through the village, one that allowed him to observe without the appearance of doing so. The morning had settled into a quiet rhythm. Shop doors stood open, conversations lingered at thresholds, and the small transactions of the day proceeded with their usual unexamined certainty. Nothing on the surface suggested that anything required attention. And yet, as he passed the grocer's window, he noticed Miss Vane inside. She stood near the counter, examining a selection of preserves with a concentration that appeared disproportionate to the task. The shopkeeper spoke to her, but she did not immediately respond. Purbright entered. The bell above the door announced him with unnecessary clarity. Miss Vane looked up, her expression shifting from abstraction to recognition. "Inspector?" "Miss Vane." The shopkeeper, sensing the presence of official interest where none had been requested, withdrew discreetly to the far end of the counter. "You have been to the house?" she said. "Yes." "And?" There was a conversation. She waited. "Mrs. Dalrymple was expecting someone," he said. Miss Vane's brows drew together. "Expecting?" "Yes." "Then I wasn't mistaken." "No." She set down the jar she had been holding. "Did they come?" "She does not know." "That isn't possible." "On the contrary," said Purbright, "it is often the preferred position." Miss Vane considered this. "Who was it?" she asked. "A former acquaintance?" "That sounds deliberate." "It was." She hesitated. "Mr. Carrow knew?" "Yes." "And said nothing?" "He said a great deal," Purbright replied, "though not, perhaps, on that subject." Miss Vane glanced toward the door, then back at him. "There was something else," she said quietly. "Yes?" "When I heard the voices." Purbright waited. "I thought for a moment that one of them was familiar." "In what way?" "I couldn't place it," she said. "Not exactly, but it didn't feel like a stranger." "Someone local?" "Perhaps." She frowned. "But that doesn't make sense." "Why not?" "Because if it were someone local, they wouldn't need to." She stopped. "To what?" he prompted. "To come in that way." "Unobserved," he said. "Yes." Purbright inclined his head slightly. "Unless," he said, "they preferred not to be observed." Miss Vane looked at him, her uncertainty deepening. "That would mean—" "Yes," he said. "It would." There was a brief silence. The shopkeeper, at the far end, busied himself with an arrangement that required no attention. "Do you think Mr. Carrow was involved?" she asked. Purbright considered this. "I think," he said, "that Mr. Carrow has a particular interest in how events are described." "That isn't an answer." "No," she sighed. "You never answer directly, do you?" "Only when it is useful." "And when is that?" "When the answer has already been given." She regarded him for a moment, then gave a small, reluctant smile. "I suppose I should let you get on," she said. "Yes." "But if you find out—" "I shall listen," he said. She nodded. Purbright left the shop and continued along the street. The village, in its ordinary way, offered no resistance to observation. Faces were familiar, routines established, and the boundaries between public and private life maintained with quiet consistency. It was, he reflected, precisely the sort of place in which something might occur without being acknowledged. By the time he reached the station, The morning had advanced. Sergeant Bryce looked up as he entered. "Everything in order, sir?" "As far as it goes." Bryce hesitated. There was a call. "Yes?" "Mr. Carrow?" Purbright paused. "He asked if you had been to see Mrs. Dalrymple." "And what did you tell him?" "That you had." "And?" "He said he might call in later." "I see." Purbright removed his hat. "Did he say why?" "No, sir. Only that it would be helpful." Purbright nodded. "Helpful," he repeated. Bryce shifted slightly. "Do you expect him to come?" "Yes." "When?" "Soon." He moved to his desk but did not sit. Instead, he stood for a moment considering the room. "Sergeant," he said. "Yes, sir?" "If Mr. Carrow does come, I should like to speak with him alone." "Of course, sir." Bryce returned to his work. Purbright sat down at last, though without immediately attending to any papers. His attention, once again, seemed directed elsewhere, not outward, but inward, as though arranging a sequence not yet fully formed. The clock on the wall marked the passage of time with a steady impartiality. At 20 minutes past 12, the door opened. Mr. Carrow entered with an air of controlled purpose. "Inspector?" "Mr. Carrow?" He removed his gloves and held them in one hand as though uncertain where to place them. "I trust I am not intruding." "Not at all." Carrow glanced briefly at Bryce, then back at Purbright. "I wondered if we might speak privately." "Of course." Purbright rose and indicated the adjoining room. Carrow entered first. The door closed behind them. For a moment, neither spoke. Then Carrow cleared his throat. "I understand you have been making inquiries." "I have been listening." "Yes," said Carrow. "So I gather." He moved slightly, then stopped. "I think it would be best," he said, "if certain matters were clarified." "I agree." Carrow looked at him steadily. "The person Mrs. Dalrymple expected," he said, "did not come." "That is not her view?" "It is mine." Purbright inclined his head. "And on what do you base it?" Carrow hesitated, just briefly. "On the fact," he said, "that I would have known." Purbright regarded him. "Would you?" "Yes." "Why?" Carrow's expression tightened. "Because," he said, "I was the one who arranged that they should not." There was a silence that did not shift. Purbright did not move. "I see," he said. Carrow exhaled, and as though the admission had cost him something measurable. "It was a mistake," he added, "to involve her at all." "And yet you did." "Yes." "Why?" Carrow looked away. "That is not relevant." "On the contrary," said Purbright, "it may be the only relevant point." Carrow said nothing. Purbright waited. The silence extended, not uncomfortably, but with a certain weight. At length, Carrow spoke again. "I wished to prevent an encounter," he said, "and you believe you succeeded." "I know I did." Purbright considered this. "And yet," he said. Miss Vane heard voices. Carrow's gaze flickered. She was mistaken. Possibly. And nothing was taken, nothing disturbed. Not in any obvious sense. Carrow's hands tightened slightly around his gloves. "Inspector," he said, "there is no incident here." Purbright regarded him quietly. "No," he said. There is only an arrangement," Carrow frowned. "An arrangement of what?" "Of silence," Purbright replied. Carrow held his gaze. "And you intend to disturb it?" Purbright considered this. "No," he said. "I intend to understand its shape." Carrow said nothing. After a moment, Purbright inclined his head. "Thank you," he said. Carrow remained where he was, as though uncertain whether the conversation had concluded. Then, with a small, controlled movement, he turned and left the room. Purbright did not follow. He stood for a moment, listening. not to any sound but to the absence that followed. And in that absence, something had altered, not in what had been said, but in what could no longer be unsaid. Purbright did not immediately resume his seat after Mr. Carrow's departure. He remained standing in the small adjoining room, with his attention fixed not on the door through which Carrow had gone, but on the space he had left behind. It was not the admission itself that held his interest. Such things were often offered under the mistaken belief that they clarified matters, but the manner in which it had been given. Carrow had spoken with certainty. Too much certainty, perhaps. Purbright returned at last to the main office, where Sergeant Bryce looked up with an expression that suggested curiosity restrained by discipline. "Well, sir?" "He was helpful," said Purbright. "In what way?" He confirmed that something was arranged. "And prevented?" "So he believes." Bryce frowned slightly. "Do you agree?" Purbright took his seat. "I think," he said, "that Mr. Carrow has a particular confidence in his own arrangements." "And the confidence is misplaced?" "Confidence," Purbright replied, "is often a form of selection." Bryce considered this, then nodded, though without evident clarity. "Is there anything you'd like me to do, sir?" "Yes," said Purbright. "I should like to take a short walk." "A walk?" "Yes." Bryce hesitated. "Shall I accompany you?" "No." Purbright reached for his hat. "I think this is best done alone." The path to the river lay beyond the village, following a narrow track that wound between fields and low hedges before descending toward a stretch of water that was seldom disturbed. The boathouse stood there, a small, weathered structure set slightly apart from the bank. It belonged, nominally, to Mrs. Dalrymple, though it had not been in regular use for some time. Purbright approached without haste. The afternoon had settled into a quiet that was neither oppressive nor entirely natural. The sort of quiet, he reflected, that allowed for the possibility of interruption. The door of the boathouse was closed. He paused before it, listening. There was nothing. He opened it. Inside, the air was cool and faintly damp. The interior was simple, a narrow boat secured along one side, a few implements arranged with a care that suggested they had once been important, and a small wooden bench near the far wall. Nothing appeared disturbed. And yet, as in the house, there was a sense, not of disorder, but of recent presence. Purbright stepped inside. The floorboards creaked slightly underfoot, though not in a manner that indicated unfamiliar weight. He moved toward the bench. There he stopped. On the surface of the bench lay a single object, a handkerchief neatly folded. It was not, in itself, remarkable. And yet its placement, precise, deliberate, suggested intention. Purbright did not touch it immediately. Instead, he considered its position in relation to the room, the door, the boat. Then, with a careful motion, he lifted it. There were no initials, no obvious marks, but the fabric retained a faint trace of scent, something not entirely consistent with the surroundings. He replaced it exactly as he had found it. The boat itself showed no sign of recent use. The oars rested where they had been left, their surfaces undisturbed. Purbright moved toward the small window at the rear of the structure. It looked out onto the water, which lay still, reflecting the muted light of the afternoon. He stood there for a moment, but then he turned back toward the door. As he did so, he heard it, a sound, slight but distinct, not within the boathouse, outside. He remained still. The sound came again, a footstep perhaps, or the suggestion of one. Purbright moved toward the door and opened it without haste. The path beyond lay empty, but the grass to one side showed a faint disturbance, as though recently pressed. He stepped out. The track led away from the river, curving back toward the lane. Purbright followed it for a short distance, his pace measured, his attention directed not at the path itself, but at its margins. There were no clear impressions, no marks that could be identified with certainty. And yet, the sense of movement remained. He stopped. It was not, he thought, a matter of pursuit. Whatever had been here had already gone. What mattered was not where it had gone, but why it had been here at all. He returned to the boathouse. The handkerchief remained on the bench, precisely as before. Purbright regarded it for a moment, then turned away. He closed the door behind him and made his way back toward the village. The afternoon had advanced slightly, though without any notable change in its character. As he walked, he considered the arrangement. A house in which something had been expected. A disturbance that had been noticed, then dismissed. A conversation that had been conducted with care. And now a place apart where something had been left behind, not lost, left. By the time he reached the station, the light had begun to soften. Sergeant Bryce looked up as he entered. "Find anything, sir?" Purbright removed his hat. "Yes," he said. What sort of thing?" Purbright paused. "The sort," he said, "that suggests we have been looking in the wrong place." Bryce frowned. "In what way?" Purbright set his hat down. "We have been considering what may have occurred in the house," he said. "And whether someone entered it." "Yes. But it is possible," he continued, "that the house was never the point of entry." Bryce regarded him. Then what was? Purbright considered this. "The place," he said, "where one might wait." "For what?" "For the right moment," Purbright replied. Bryce nodded slowly. "And the boathouse?" Purbright moved toward his desk. "The boathouse," he said, "is where the silence changes shape." Bryce looked at him, uncertain whether this constituted an answer. Purbright sat down. He did not immediately speak again. Instead, he allowed the arrangement of the day to settle. A presence not acknowledged, a meeting perhaps prevented, or perhaps merely displaced. And somewhere between the house and the river, something had occurred that had not yet been described. He folded his hands on the desk. In such matters, it was rarely the first account that proved decisive. It was the one that emerged when silence could no longer sustain itself. The remainder of the afternoon passed without interruption, though not without consequence. Purbright did not speak immediately of the boathouse. He made a brief note, no more than a line, written with an economy that suggested the act was less for record than for arrangement, then set it aside. Sergeant Bryce, having learned that questions were best timed rather than accumulated, confined himself to his work, and it was nearly 4 o'clock when the next development occurred, and even then it announced itself without emphasis. The door opened, and the young woman from Mrs. Dalrymple's house entered. She paused just inside as though uncertain whether she had come to the correct place, then stepped forward with a quiet determination that did not quite conceal her unease. "Inspector," she said. Purbright looked up. "Yes." "I hope I'm not at all." She glanced briefly at Bryce, then back at Purbright. "I wondered if I might speak with you." "Of course." He rose and indicated the adjoining room. She followed, her hands held together in a manner that suggested both restraint and purpose. When the door closed, she remained standing. "I didn't tell you everything yesterday," she said. "No," said Purbright, "you did not." She drew a breath, and I thought it best not to. "Why?" "Because it didn't seem to belong to me." Purbright regarded her. "And now?" "Now it does." He inclined his head slightly. "Go on." She hesitated, as though arranging her thoughts not for clarity but for accuracy. "When I went inside," she said, To fetch the hot water? Yes. I didn't go straight to the kitchen? No. No. Where did you go? To the passage. Purbright waited. I heard something, she said. Before I reached the door. What sort of thing? A voice. Only one? She shook her head. No, two. He did not interrupt. They were speaking quietly, she continued. I couldn't hear the words, only the sound of them. From where? Near the sitting room, or just beyond it? Purbright considered this. And you did not enter? No. Why not? She hesitated. Because I thought I shouldn't. On whose account? She looked at him uncertain. I don't know, she said. It just felt wrong. He nodded slightly. And what did you do? I waited, she said. Only for a moment. And then? They stopped. The voices. Yes. And after that? I went to the kitchen. I did what I was supposed to do. And you told no one? No. Not even Mrs. Dalrymple? No. Why? She lowered her gaze. Because I thought she already knew. There was a brief silence. Purbright regarded her steadily. That is an interesting conclusion, he said. Yes. What led you to it? She hesitated. The way she spoke, she said. Afterwards? In what way? As though nothing had happened. Not just nothing unusual, nothing at all. And that suggested knowledge? Yes. Purbright considered this. And Mr.
Caro? She looked up. I didn't see him, she said. Not then. Not then. No, but later. Yes. In the garden? Yes. And did he give any indication? No, she said quickly. He was as he always is. Purbright inclined his head. Very well. She hesitated. There's something else. Yes. When I came back outside? Yes. I thought... She stopped. What did you think? I thought someone had just left. From where? The side of the house, near the path. Purbright remained still. Did you see them? No. Then what led you to that impression? The door, she said. It was just closing. The side door? Yes. And you are certain of this? She hesitated. As certain as I can be. Which is to say? That I didn't imagine it. Purbright regarded her for a moment. That is often sufficient, he said. She drew a breath.
And I didn't mean to cause trouble, she added. You have not caused it, he replied. You have described it. She looked at him, uncertain whether this was reassurance. What will you do? She asked. Purbright considered this. I shall listen, he said. She gave a small, almost involuntary smile. Yes, she said. You said that before. And it remains true. He moved toward the door, then paused. You have been very helpful, he said. She nodded. I thought I should be, she replied. He opened the door. Sergeant Bryce looked up, then quickly returned to his papers. The young woman left without further comment. Purbright remained standing for a moment. Then he returned to his desk. Well, sir? Said Bryce after a brief interval. Purbright did not answer at once. He reached for the note he had made earlier and read it again, though without visible interest in the words themselves. At what time did she say this occurred? Bryce asked. Shortly before the interruption. Bryce frowned. And Mr. Caro claims he prevented any such meeting. Yes. That can't both be true. No, said Purbright. It cannot. Bryce leaned forward slightly. Then one of them is mistaken. Or selective. Bryce considered this. And the person who was expected... Purbright set the note aside. May have arrived, he said, and left without being seen. Not entirely without being seen, Purbright replied. Bryce nodded slowly. The side door? Yes. There was a brief silence. And the boathouse? Bryce asked. Purbright leaned back slightly. "The boathouse," he said.
I is where one might wait without being observed. For the house, yes, and then approach it. When the moment allows, Bryce sat back. Then the meeting wasn't prevented, he said. Purbright regarded him. No, he said. It was interrupted. Bryce frowned. By what? Purbright considered this. By the arrival, he said, of 20 guests and a tray of tea. Bryce allowed himself a small, uncertain smile. That would do it. Yes. Purbright's expression did not change. And afterwards? Bryce asked. Afterwards, said Purbright, the arrangement resumed, as though nothing had happened. Yes. Bryce was silent for a moment. But something had, he said. Yes. Purbright folded his hands. And now, he added, we begin to see what it was. He did not elaborate. Instead, he allowed the account to settle, not as a conclusion,
when but as a shape emerging from absence. Voices heard but not acknowledged, a door closing without witness, a meeting conducted in fragments, and between them a silence that had been carefully maintained. Until now, the account, once spoken, did not expand immediately. Purbright did not press it. He had learned that certain recollections, when approached too directly, had a tendency to contract rather than clarify. Instead, he allowed the details already given to settle into their natural relations, trusting that what remained unsaid would, in time, assert itself. It was early evening when the next piece presented itself, and it did so not with urgency, but with reluctance. Miss Vane returned. She entered the station with less hesitation than before, though her expression suggested that her purpose was not entirely welcome to her. Inspector. Miss Vane? I hope I'm not at all. She glanced briefly towards Sergeant Bryce, then back. I wondered if I might speak with you again. Of course. They moved, as before, to the adjoining room. This time she did not wait to be prompted. I remembered something, she said. Yes. It didn't seem important at the time. That is often the case. She gave a small, uncertain breath. It was just before I spoke, she continued. When everything went quiet. Purbright inclined his head. Yes. I had been listening to Mr. Carrow, she said. He was talking about something. Property, I think. I wasn't really attending. And then I heard the sound, or the absence of it. She paused, and I looked up. Yes. Not toward the house, she said, but toward Mrs. Dalrymple. Purbright did not interrupt. She'd already turned, Miss Vane continued, or before I said anything. Turned in what way? As though she had heard it first. Purbright considered this. And you are certain of this? She hesitated. Yes, she said. At least I believe so. That is sufficient. Miss Vane looked at him, searching his expression. But that would mean, she began. Yes, he said quietly. It would. She sat down as though the thought required support. Then she knew, she said. She expected, Purbright replied, that there is a difference. But she reacted before I spoke. Yes. And still said there was nothing. Yes. Miss Vane frowned. That doesn't make sense. It makes a particular kind of sense, he said. She looked at him. The sort, he continued, that depends upon timing. Timing of what? Of acknowledgement. She was silent for a moment.
Mr. Carrow? What of him? He didn't react, not at first. No, only after I spoke. Yes. She looked down at her hands. That's when he stopped talking, she said. Mid-sentence? Purbright inclined his head. And then he began again, she added, as though nothing had happened. Yes. Miss Vane looked up. Is that important? Yes, said Purbright. In what way? It suggests, he said, that he did not hear what you heard, or pretended not to. Possibly. She considered this. And the girl, the one who brought the tea? Yes. She must have heard it too. Indeed. But she said nothing. No. Why? Purbright regarded her. Because, he said, she was not expected to hear anything at all. Miss Vane absorbed this slowly. That's not fair, she said. No, he agreed. It rarely is. There was a brief silence. Then there were 3 of us, she said, who heard something. Yes. And only one of us spoke. Yes. And the others arranged their silence, Purbright said. Miss Vane looked at him steadily. And now? Now, he said, the arrangement is less secure. She gave a small, uncertain smile. I don't think they'll like that. No, he said. I don't think they will. She rose. I'm glad I remembered, she said. So am I. She hesitated at the door. Inspector? Yes. Do you think there was something serious? Purbright considered this. I think, he said, that something occurred which has not yet been described in full. That isn't quite an answer. No, she nodded. I suppose I'll hear about it, she said. In due course. She left. Purbright remained where he was for a moment, then returned to the main office.
Sergeant Bryce looked up. Another development, sir? Yes. Bryce waited. Miss Vane has recalled, Purbright said, that Mrs. Dalrymple reacted before the disturbance was mentioned. Bryce frowned. Then she knew it was coming. She expected something. And Mr. Carrow didn't react until later. Yes. That puts them out of step. Precisely. Bryce leaned back slightly. And the girl heard voices in the passage. Yes. And someone left by the side door. Yes. Bryce shook his head. It doesn't fit, he said. No, said Purbright, not yet. He moved to his desk and sat down, but it will. Bryce hesitated. What's missing? He asked. Purbright folded his hands. A sequence, he said, of events? Of understanding? Bryce considered this. And where do we find that? Purbright looked up. In what has not been said. Bryce frowned. Aye, but we've had 3 accounts. Yes. And none of them agree. On the contrary, said Purbright, they agree very well. Bryce looked at him, puzzled. In what way? They all omit the same thing. Bryce leaned forward slightly. And that is? Purbright did not answer immediately. Instead, he allowed the silence to settle, as though demonstrating its shape. At the moment of interruption, he said at last, something was already underway. Yes. And each account begins after that point. Bryce considered this. So whatever started it has not yet been described. Bryce nodded slowly. And someone remembers. Yes. But doesn't want to, or does not realize that they do. Bryce sat back. And that's the inconvenient part. Yes, said Purbright. It is. He reached for a fresh sheet of paper, though he did not yet begin to write. Outside, the evening had deepened, and the village had resumed its quiet pattern. But within that pattern, something remained unresolved, not in what had been said, but in what had been remembered too late. And such memories, he reflected, had a tendency to return at precisely the moment they were least welcome. The following morning arrived with a clarity that felt almost deliberate, as though the day had arranged itself in readiness for something not yet declared. Purbright was at his desk before the station had fully settled into its routine. A sheet of paper lay before him, still blank, though not unattended. He regarded it without urgency, as if the act of writing required not decision, but permission. Sergeant Bryce entered shortly after, pausing just inside the door. "You're early." "Oi, sir." "So it would seem." Bryce removed his coat and glanced toward the desk. "Something expected?" Yes, said Purbright. What sort of something? The sort that prefers not to arrive, he replied. Bryce absorbed this, then nodded with the cautious acceptance of a man who had learned that clarity in such matters was often retrospective. For some time, nothing occurred. The station settled into its morning rhythm. Papers were arranged, a brief message delivered and acknowledged, and the clock marked its intervals with steady impartiality. Purbright did not move. He listened. Not to any particular sound, but to the pattern beneath them, the small inconsistencies that distinguished one morning from another. There was, he thought, a certain hesitation in the air, though not one that could be attributed to any single cause. At 10:15, the telephone rang. Bryce answered it, listened, then looked toward Purbright. "It's Mrs. Dalrymple, sir." Purbright rose and took the receiver. "Inspector Purbright." There was a pause. "I hope I am not calling at an inconvenient moment," said Mrs. Dalrymple. "No." "I wondered if you might come to the house again." "I believe I might." "There is something—" She hesitated. "Something I should like you to hear." "To hear?" "Yes." "I shall be there shortly." He replaced the receiver. Bryce watched him. "Another clarification?" "Possibly." "Shall I come?" "No." Purbright took his hat. "I think," he said, "this may require a particular kind of listening." The lane appeared unchanged, though the light gave it a sharper definition. The house stood as before, its arrangement intact, its composure unaltered. Mrs. Dalrymple received him in the hallway. "Thank you for coming." "Of course." She did not lead him to the sitting-room. Instead, she paused, then turned toward the passage. "This way," she said. Purbright followed. The passage extended along the side of the house, its narrowness lending it a quality of containment. The doors along it were closed, their surfaces uniform, their presence understated. Mrs. Dalrymple stopped near the midpoint. "It was here," she said. Purbright did not speak. "I thought," she continued, "that if you stood where I stood—" She gestured slightly. He took her place. For a moment nothing occurred. The house was quiet. Then, faintly, something shifted. Not a sound precisely, but the suggestion of one, the sort of residual presence that lingers after speech has ceased. Purbright remained still. "You see?" she said.
Yes. It isn't clear." "No, but it is there." "Yes." She looked at him. "I did not imagine it." "No." She drew a breath. "And yet when I went into the room there was no one." "Which room?" She hesitated. "The small sitting room," she said. "The one by the desk." "Yes." Purbright considered this. "And the voices?" They had stopped. "Yes." "And you said nothing?" "No." "Why?" She looked away. "Because I recognized one of them." Purbright did not move. "Whose?" he asked. She hesitated. "I am not certain," she said. "Only that it was not unfamiliar." "Not unfamiliar?" "No." "And that troubled you?" "Yes." "Why?" "Because," she said, "it should not have been there." There was a brief silence. Purbright listened, not to her words, but to their arrangement. "And Mr. Carrow?" he asked. He was outside." "You are certain?" "Yes." "And the girl? In the kitchen?" "Then the voices were not accounted for," she said. "No." She turned toward him. "I thought," she said, "that if I ignored it, it would resolve itself." "And did it?" "No." Purbright inclined his head slightly. "Silence," he said, "rarely resolves anything. It merely preserves it." She gave a small, strained smile. "I begin to see that." They stood for a moment without speaking. Then Purbright moved a step forward along the passage. "May I?" he asked. "Yes." He proceeded to the door of the small sitting room and opened it. The room was as before, the desk, the chair, the arrangement, all intact. And yet, as he stood in the doorway, he allowed his attention to rest not on the objects themselves, but on the space between them. Where were you standing?" he asked. By the door." "And the voices?" "Just beyond, or perhaps within." Purbright nodded. He closed the door. "And you heard them stop?" "Yes." "Immediately?" "Yes." He returned to her. "And after that?" "I went back to the garden." "And said nothing?" "Yes." Purbright regarded her for a moment. "Until now?" "Yes." There was a pause. "Inspector?" she said. "What does it mean?" He considered this. "It means," he said, "that the moment we have been seeking did not occur in the garden." "No?" "Nor entirely in this room." She looked at him. "Then where?" Purbright did not answer at once. Instead, he turned slightly, as though aligning the passage with the rooms beyond it, the house with the garden, and the garden with the path that led toward the river. "When a conversation is interrupted," he said, "it does not cease. It relocates." She frowned slightly. "To where?" "To the nearest place," he replied, "where it may continue unobserved." She followed his gaze, though without understanding. "The boathouse," she said. "Yes." There was a silence that carried a different weight. "Then whatever was said was not finished here," Purbright said. She looked at him, her composure beginning to shift. "And you intend to find out what it was?" Purbright inclined his head. "I intend," he said, "to listen until it is said." He moved toward the door. Behind him the passage remained as it had been, narrow, contained, and quietly holding what had passed through it. But now, at last, it had given something back. Purbright did not go at once to the river. He left the house with the same measured composure with which he had entered.
Pausing neither in the garden nor at the gate. The arrangement, he thought, had now altered sufficiently that further observation in its current state would produce little that was new. What remained would not be found in the repetition of earlier positions. Instead, he returned briefly to the station. Sergeant Bryce looked up as he entered, his expression suggesting that questions had been prepared but not yet selected. "Well, sir?" Purbright removed his hat. "It appears," he said, "that the conversation did not end where it was heard." Bryce nodded slowly. "The boathouse?" "Yes." "Then that's where we go next." "In due course." Bryce hesitated. "You don't sound in a hurry." "I am not." "Why not?" Purbright considered this. "Because," he said, "we are no longer waiting for the event." "No." "No. We are waiting for the account." Bryce frowned. "And that takes time." "It takes admission," said Purbright. He moved to his desk but did not sit. "Has anyone called?" "No, sir." "Then we shall go out." "Now?" "Yes." They walked together this time, though without the appearance of urgency. The path toward the river lay as before, its quiet undisturbed, its direction unambiguous. The boathouse came into view. Its door stood as Purbright had left it. He paused. "Before we go in," he said, "there is something you should understand." Bryce waited. "What we find here," Purbright continued, "will not be new." "No?" "No, it will only confirm what has already been said." Bryce nodded. "And what has been said?" "Very little," Purbright replied. He opened the door. The interior remained unchanged. The bench, the boat, and the small arrangement of objects, all as before. Bryce stepped inside, his gaze moving from one detail to another. "It doesn't look like much," he said. "No." Purbright moved toward the bench. The handkerchief remained where it had been placed. Bryce noticed it. "That wasn't here before," he said. "It was," said Purbright. Bryce frowned. "Then why leave it?" Purbright regarded the object. "Because it was not lost. He did not touch it. Instead, he turned toward the door. "Wait here," he said. Bryce hesitated. "You're going back?" For a moment. Purbright stepped outside and followed the path a short distance toward the house, then stopped. He listened. The afternoon had settled into its earlier quiet, though now it carried a different quality, not absence, but anticipation. After a moment he turned back. Bryce remained where he had been, though his posture suggested a growing awareness that the stillness of the place was not entirely empty. "Well?" Bryce asked. Purbright closed the door behind him. "There is someone else," he said. Bryce straightened. "Here?" "Nearby." As if in answer, a faint sound reached them, the soft, unmistakable movement of a footstep on the path outside. Bryce looked toward the door. Purbright did not move. A moment passed, then the handle turned. The door opened. Mrs. Dalrymple stood there. For an instant she did not speak. Then she stepped inside and closed the door behind her. "I thought," she said, "that I might find you here." Purbright inclined his head. "Yes." She glanced briefly at Bryce, then back at Purbright. "I did not come to interrupt." "No." "I came to correct something." Purbright regarded her. In what respect?" She moved a step further into the room. "What I told you," she said, "was not entirely accurate." "In what way?" She hesitated. "I said that I recognized one of the voices." "Yes." "That is not true." Purbright did not speak. "I did not recognize it," she continued. "I expected to." Bryce shifted slightly. "And you did not?" Purbright said. "No." There was a brief silence. Then the expectation was mistaken. "Yes." "And that troubled you?" "Yes." She looked at him steadily. "Because it meant," she said, "that the person I had arranged to meet was not the person who came." Bryce drew a quiet breath. Purbright remained still. "And Mr. Carrow?" he asked. He did not know. "He believes he prevented the meeting." "Yes." "And you allowed him to believe that?" "Yes." "Why?" She hesitated. Because it was simpler." "For whom?" "For everyone." Purbright considered this. "And the actual meeting?" She looked away. "It was brief." "Where?" "Here." Her gaze returned to the room. "In this place?" "And the voices?" "Mine," she said, "and another's." Bryce looked from one to the other. "And the interruption?" Purbright asked. "The guests," she said. "The noise, the arrival." So the conversation was not finished. "No." "And the other person left?" "Yes." "By which route?" "The path." Purbright inclined his head slightly. "And the handkerchief?" She followed his gaze. "I left it," she said, deliberately. "Yes." "Why?" She hesitated. "As a signal." "To whom?" "To the person I'd expected." Purbright regarded her for a moment. But they had not come. "No." Then the signal remained. "Yes." There was a silence that did not shift. Bryce spoke at last. "Who was it?" he asked. Mrs. Dalrymple did not answer immediately. Instead, she looked at Purbright. "You already know," she said. Purbright considered this. "I know," he said, "that the smallest admission is often the most sufficient." She held his gaze. "And is this sufficient?" He inclined his head. "Yes." She exhaled, as though something long held had been released, though not entirely. "Then you will understand," she said. "I believe I do." Bryce looked at him, uncertain. "But you haven't said—" "No," said Purbright. "I have not." He moved toward the door. Mrs. Dalrymple stepped aside. As he opened it, the light from outside entered the room, altering its arrangement by a degree so slight it might have gone unnoticed. "Inspector," she said. He paused. "It is finished, then?" Purbright considered this.
No," he said. It is understood. He stepped outside. Behind him, the boathouse remained, its contents unchanged, its silence no longer arranged, but resolved. And in that resolution, nothing more needed to be added. The end,